Well, I wanted to welcome everyone. We may have some people sort of joining us as we go here, but I wanted to get started and respect everyone's sort of time. So thanks for joining the second of three in a series of Great Lakes Commons Charter Cafes. We're calling them cafes as ways just to sort of hang out and talk to each other about the Commons Charter, about what we do, what we're looking for. Today's plan is pretty simple. We're going to do a quick go-around of introductions. I'd like for us to have a shared reading of the Commons Charter, and I'll tell you why in a second. The main part of this is hearing any stories or examples of how people are bringing the Commons Charter into their lives, and then balancing that out is how Great Lakes Commons can support your initiatives more, how you could support Great Lakes Commons, and also in a third way, how each of you could support each other in your commons work across various borders or interests even. Because in many ways, as commoners, we understand that we are our greatest asset and resource for working on these things. So I wanted to say thanks to everyone for joining us. And I've already introduced how to use Zoom, but if you have any questions, you can just use the chat box. So that's the last thing I'll introduce is in the bottom middle, there is a little sort of chat icon, and you can send a message to the whole group, that would be all, or even to an individual. So here I can send one, so I'll send one to the whole group saying, here I am. And you can sort of see that pop up on your chat box with a little message there, okay? And so I'm just gonna do we're gonna do a quick go around here. So I'm gonna ask you to unmute yourself. That way we can do a little capacity test here. So in the bottom left, when it's your turn, you could just unmute yourself. And I just like, there's not that many of us as I thought, but in maybe one or two breaths, if you could answer these three things. So, what's your name? Where do you call home? And, is the Great Lakes Commons Charter changing your relationship to these waters? How is the Charter changing your relationship to water where you live or the Great Lakes in particular? So I'll go first, just as a modeling it. As you likely already know, I'm Paul Baines. I call the Humber River watershed my home, which is in Toronto. And for me, the Great Lakes Commons Charter is a way of putting together what we are looking for, what we want, versus reacting and responding to what we don't want. Not only as Canadians or Americans, but as a buyer region. Anyway, that's who I am. So I'll ask you to unmute yourself, and we'll just go around. Maybe Marina, you want to go first?
Oops. Okay, sorry, I got the unmute. So my name is Marina, and I too call the Humber watershed home, based in Toronto. The Great Lakes Commons, for me at least, I've been reading a lot about water, and there's been a lot of bad things going on in different bodies of water. I too am looking for something a little bit more preventative rather than reactive. And also finding a way to connect people a little bit more, just becoming more aware, just because everything is so connected. We are water, and I think that concept of that we are water has really been coming to the forefront with the Commons. So that's, I think I've said everything.
Thanks, Marina. When you're finished, yeah, perfect. Thanks for remuting there. Ellen, did you want to go next?
Sure. Hi, I'm Ellen Friedman. Hi, Ben. Nice to see you. I live in Austin, Texas. I founded an organization called Common Spark. We're in the process of creating a wiki to catalog commons. And I have been inspired by the Great Lakes Commons effort and the Charter since it started. I'm slowly trying to get some folks here to maybe follow suit with the Colorado River ecosystems, bioregion, and I'm also working on possibly exploring the creating a new charter, kind of riffing off of the Charter of the Forest for global commons, which would include probably the entire water cycle. And I'm happy to be here.
Thanks, Ellen. Ben, do you want to join in?
Sure, thanks, Paul. I'm Ben Roberts. I'm in Newtown, Connecticut, which I think puts me in the Housatonic River watershed, famously polluted by GE way back in the day with lots of PCBs that make it so we can't eat any of the fish there. Controversy about whether to dredge them up or not. The charter I grew up in Chicago, so I grew up on Lake Michigan, and we had a house in Michigan on the lake directly across from Chicago. So I have a history and connection to those waters. And I reached out to a lot of my high school classmates and just sort of told them about the charter, and a bunch of them signed it. And at least one person said, hey, let me know how I could get involved. And my work is in convening people in dialogue to serve things like reclaiming the commons, so I connected with Paul in that regard, and it really I've been thinking a lot about water and where there are opportunities for dialogue that can be powerful, and for connecting people up in ways that can really elevate the work that we're all doing or want to do. So just being engaged with the charter has really given me a place where that can be more concrete. And I'm looking forward to whatever ways I can be of service to that work, and how that can weave in with other work I'm doing. That's it.
Thanks, Ben. Susan, are you ready to say hi? You'll have to unmute. Oh, wait a second here.
No. Yes.
There you go.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
I guess pretty much I would agree with your first speaker, that we just are more connected through the commons, and it's an intriguing concept. Fits along with some of the other social movements like the open source everything idea and the sharing economy. And I think it's possibly one of these big ideas that really could gain traction. So I'd very much like to see it happen. And I haven't been spreading the word very actively, but I will try to do so as best I can.
And later on, we want to highlight some ideas, Susan, and maybe you could tell us a bit more about your video project and all the rest of it. We'll talk about that for sure.
Be glad to.
All right. Okay, keep moving along here. Richard, would you love to introduce yourself? Well, 1 second. Let me unmute you here. There you go.
Hello?
Yeah.
I'm Richard Childs. I live near the Humber watershed and spend time on the water or by the water virtually every day. I'm here to find out about the Big Lakes Commons, the charter. Quite naive at this point. I have, since January of this year, I started a project where I remove recyclables from the Humber watershed south of the King's Mill, and the numbers are scary, but it's showing great results.
Great. Okay, I want to hear maybe a bit more about that in a bit too. Thanks, Richard. So I want to just give a quick, for those who don't know, but background on the Commons Charter. It's sort of the main tool for the Great Lakes Commons Initiative, which was started about 5 years ago. And then about 3 years ago, we started the Commons Charter sort of process. And that was sort of a 2-year process with mostly just individuals working in collaboration. People like, I just want to honor their names, with Faye Brown, Alexa Bradley, Emma Louie, even though Emma Louie was from Council of Canadians, Ricardo Levins Morales, Sue Chibolo, Michael Zimmerman, Frank Edward-Hishik, Julie Risto, Michael Brothers. And so operating mostly as individuals rather than a bunch of NGOs working together, the Commons Charter was edited, re-edited, and made into its current form. Institutionally, Great Lakes Commons is a sort of a seed project out of a group called On the Commons in Minneapolis. And Council of Canadians has been a part of this from the beginning as well. That's why Emma Louie was involved. And so here we were as a network of people creating an invitation, an aspiration, a declaration about our shared rights and responsibilities for the Great Lakes as a bioregion, right? Not as Americans or as Canadians, but as a bioregion, natives and non-natives, obviously with a commons ethic, and as part of a process of re-indigenizing our relationship with the land and the water. So that's sort of a bit of the, if you didn't already know, like the context of the Commons Charter. And we sort of released it about a year and a bit ago. And while we're interested in getting it to as many people as possible, we're interested in having people having discussions like this, thinking about how it can be integrated into people's personal or public lives, both as individuals or as collectives of people. One of the things we did as a leadership council for Great Lakes Commons a few months ago is we read the charter as a group. And before we talk about examples of things people are doing and thinking about what offers people can make or what needs they have to bring this charter a little bit closer to home, because it is kind of an abstract sort of, declarative kind of thing. We're mostly used to petitions, I think, or we're used to more blueprints of what to do. Before we do those things, I'd just like for us to sort of share a quick reading of the Commons Charter. Some of you may have read it recently. Some of you may have been a long time. But I do think there is something that happens, and I won't say much more than that. There's something that happens when we read it together as a declaration. So we're going to try this out in a way that may seem chaotic, but the idea is that we are sort of trying to, can everybody see that now? Or if everyone can see this. I'm going to unmute everyone. Dangerous, I know. But I'd like us to sort of feel it out. And, when you feel like you want to read, just read a little bit. There's various cooperation exercises I and others may have done around. It's a lot easier face-to-face. But that's part of the challenge of this movement, is we are working across large distances, and so we are separated through technology. But we do want to sort of feel like we can step into reading something or step back and be more of a listener. And I think as a sort of a game / exercise in commenting, I think it'd be interesting to sort of try to read this document together. Is there anybody who can't see my screen and can't see the text?
I can see it.
Anyone who can't?
No, I can't.
Okay, great. Okay, so that's my introduction to that, and I'll just start by saying we, the people of the Great Lakes, love and depend upon our waters to sustain our lives, our communities, and all life in our ecosystem.
Can I jump in next?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. It is therefore with growing alarm that we confront a painful reality, that despite decades of effort, the Great Lakes are more threatened than ever. As people from across the Great Lakes, we find this unacceptable. We cannot stand by while our waters are treated as an expandable and exploitable resource when we know they are a source of life.
Moved by a hope that we can create a thriving, life-sustaining future for our lake. We step forward to take up our responsibility to care for and act on behalf of these waters, our Great Lakes Commons. Seeing that the health of our waters is intertwined with our own health and that of generations yet to come, we are called to assert a deeper connection and a more powerful role in the future of our waters.
So we hereby set forth the Great Lakes Commons Charter, a living document that affirms and empowers the wisdom and rightful role of the people of the lakes as stewards of our waters.
This declaration of the first principles emerged from the collaborative work of people and communities around the lakes. Together, we reflect many walks of life, histories, and cultures. At the same time, a single purpose unites us: to transition to a mode of Great Lakes governance by which the waters and all living beings can flourish.
Toward this end, we affirm that the waters of the Great Lakes have sustained the lives of people and the communities in their basin since time immemorial, and they should continue to do so in perpetuity.
That the waters, ecosystem, and communities of the Great Lakes are entwined and interdependent. Damage to any of these causes harm to others.
That the Great Lakes are a gift and a responsibility held in common by the peoples and communities of the lakes and must be treated as such as to ensure their preservation for coming generations.
That the boundaries of states, provinces, and nations crisscross the lakes but do not divide their natural integrity. All decision-making that impacts the Great Lakes must place the well-being of the bioregion in the ecosystem as a whole at the center of consideration.
And that the inherent sovereignty and rights of indigenous peoples, as codified in treaties and international agreements, must be upheld as foundational to commons governance.
Therefore, we join our voices in affirming the spirit and necessity of this declaration as the foundation for a renewed relationship and mode of governance for Great Lakes Commons. We welcome the wisdom, standing in power that this document will accrue over time to shape the future of our lakes. We invest it with our hopes and commitments to that future and to the future generations who will inherit the legacy of our actions. This last part, can we do together, all together here? In signing this charter, we embrace our responsibility, individual and collective, to act on behalf of these matters to future generations. Woo, we made it. Okay, how we doing? Yes, I'm gonna unstop this. So that was a virtual web video cam, first time ever that's been done, actually, but hopefully not the last. And again, I don't know how else to do this, but I'm just gonna unmute. I just love to sort of a check-in on people. I know I gave a little introduction to that, of how we did that at the Leadership Council, but I just love to hear people's responses of what that felt like.
I think having that participatory piece, I guess, gets us a little bit more involved, and just the mental engagement of, I mean, I read this a while back, so now it's just reminding me, but also hearing someone else say it, I don't know, there's kind of a certain, I'm not sure what the words are here, but it just made it interesting in terms of hearing someone else's voice saying it other than my own, because when I'm reading it loud or in my head, it's me, I know who I am, but it's different when I hear it from someone else. It almost gives like an empowering sort of feeling.
Thanks.
Yeah, definitely makes it more concrete.
Mm-hmm.
Having other voices.
And
reading it, sorry, go ahead, Marina.
Oh, no, it's okay. I just said in a sense of sort of unification, going on to Susan's point. Sorry, Richard.
Reading it alone was a cognitive exercise, but this engages the heart.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely. It not only has that feeling, that felt sense of one water, but one voice.
Yeah.
Yeah, agreed.
Agreed. Definitely.
Yeah, we've done that. So we did that as a leadership council back in May, and in Toronto a few months ago, we had an event, sort of a water walk, about looking at water as a gift. And again, there was like 8 of us, and we were at the Brickworks, which is, I guess, 3 of us in Toronto, and we did a group reading of it as well. And it was, a nice circle. It was actually a lot easier, obviously, to read when and when not to speak, but we did a great job there, everyone. So thanks for entertaining that experiment in an online video reading sharing. I wanted to, unless there was anything else to add to that question, I wanted to invite any stories or experiences in which people have found the Great Lakes Commons and the Commons Charter to be a useful tool to advance what they're working on professionally, or how they making choices in their everyday lives. And I do know that, Susan, you've picked this up for the last year or two. And so if you would like to share for a couple of minutes about your project, and I'd like then opens up to anybody else who felt, who could explain how this was a tool for doing that. We have some time for that.
Yeah, I have written books about Lake Ontario for years, and have watched the lake first apparently coming back in the 70s and in the 80s and 90s. Things seemed to be getting better, and then things seemed to be not getting so good. And the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative is simply a huge pot of money that America is spending on restoration, but it seems that it's just not quite doing the job. So the Commons is possibly a way to change our past patterns of management, which just don't seem to be, it seems to be very piecemeal and very fragmented with so many overlapping jurisdictions. And I'm not the only person to say that.
Yeah. So what are you working on? Tell us what you're working on.
Well, after writing books, I'm trying to reach a wider audience with a video, in which I put forth some of the effects of the lake on its area, and then also some of the big problems that are facing it associated with the watershed, like excess of nutrients going into the water, and some of the chemical issues and endocrine disruptors and so on. But then looking for solutions, and a long-term big idea solution could very well be the Commons. So I hope to get over to Toronto possibly next month and interview Paul and talk a little bit at the end of the video about the Commons as a solution, and try to get it out there a little bit, because I've followed the lakes for years and I had not picked up on this idea. I had not heard of this idea until I was doing research for another book last spring. Yeah. And that was the first time I'd heard of it. So I know a lot of other people haven't heard of it. Mm-hmm. So for what it's worth, we're sure going to try to get this video out there, and we're sure going to try to get the Commons in there as a possible long and maybe not even too long-term solution. Yeah. We need to do things differently.
Quick question, Susan. I mean, Susan's really, to see the extent of Susan's work is pretty remarkable. I did have the privilege of looking at the chapter of the book to be published, which is about the Great Lakes Commons and looking at commons. And I think, Susan, would it be correct to say that within a 12-month or year and a half time frame, you kind of went from 0 to 100 on being knowledgeable about what a commons is and how its power to restoring right relationship with the waters? I'm curious on a bit more on your experience of that learning, and how to maybe share that, how that could be demonstrated with other professionals who, let's say, work around water and Great Lakes issues as an engineer, or as a scientist, or as a policy person, how they could, open up to this idea of commons as an ethic and as a behavior and as a uniting vision.
Yeah, I think that as the general public concept of the commons is a lot like the concept that was taught to me in the 70s in my fisheries program, which was the tragedy of the commons, where there's no control over the resource, so that it's open to everybody to exploit. And reading just a little bit on the internet about the true commons, where the local people have some control over it and can manage it. It was kind of an eye-opener. You immediately begin to understand, particularly, I think that people are a little more open to this idea because of the sharing economy, the open source movement. I mean, like, you know, the common, the way that the programmers work together on Linux, for example. A lot of that sharing going on. The logistics of making it work are formidable, and I know that has to be done, but yet it's kind of a big idea, and it goes along with grassroots democracy and open honesty and integrity and the opposite of corruption and the influence that goes on in dark corners. So I think it's crossing a lot of different disciplines and boundaries. So it might be possible to, if you can draw the dots, which I'm still trying to work on doing, for people to see that it does make some sense. I would have been very cynical about it had I not done any reading. But I'm kind of coming around to the idea that we've got to do something different.
Yeah.
And you can see when you get a large number of people working on a problem, such as programming a computer or creating the internet, that crowdsourcing hive intelligence is a pretty powerful tool. And people can act in their self-interest as a group if certain rules and formulas are laid down and the technology is available. And that, of course, that's a biggie. So I don't know if that ramble was enlightening, but yeah.
At least one fan there.
Hearing other people talk about it.
Any other examples of or specifics around how the Creative Commons Charter has helped people understand or rethink or reshape, or even in some ways has illustrate what you're already sort of doing, just calling it by a different name? I often find that commons and commoning is hiding in plain sight, where people's just what they would consider common sense or just what they sort of grew up with wasn't called commoning or wasn't called a commons relationship, but very much embodied this idea of reciprocity or long-term thinking or precautionary sort of principles or whatever. And so I'm just curious on people's, any other examples or stories people want to share of how this charter is something to sort of build a bridge to where they'd like to be, or in some ways is a good affirmation of what they've been sort of doing in their lives, or personally or professionally. Anyone want to jump in? Is that Marina? Yeah, I'll unmute you. There you go. Yeah. Go ahead.
When I first started learning about the commons and studying it, it seemed so aspirational and not concrete. And seeing the Great Lakes Commons and the Charter made me realize, okay, so this is a journey to get to, to reclaim the commons, to reclaim the knowledge of the concept itself. A lot of most white people have forgotten the concept ever existed, and I find that indigenous societies really still have that knowledge within their traditions, within their wisdom. The Great Lakes Commons Charter has shown me that it's possible to take this super big vision of creating a commons and a new form of governance for something as large as the Great Lakes bioregion. And I find it inspiring to the nth degree. It makes me think, okay, so this is a model of how we can reclaim the commons locally and globally, because they're so threatened by enclosure and privatization. When I look at, I read a book last year called Caliban and the Witch by Sylvia Federici. And it confirmed a sense that I had had for a while after studying the commons, that the commons is really the lifeblood of capitalism. That without the commons to take the resources and to externalize the trash to, then if we shut off the access to the commons, and put some boundaries up and make it so that the resources that are taken or the pollution that's externalized, the whole game changes when you reclaim the commons and you shut off the free access regime. So it seems like reclaiming the commons and reclaiming the concept of the commons is at the root of the solutions to so many problems that we have today.
Cool. Thanks, Ellen. And she's self-muted right away. She's a pro at this. Marina, you had some things to offer?
Yeah, so kind of going off of Ellen had brought up, there is a connection between how the economy currently functions and the need for our resources. And you did bring up a little bit about enclosure, but I think this is one of the pieces that in the current system that we live in is one of the things that I feel concerned about is how water has how much of an effort this is across the border. So what I'm looking at, what I'm thinking about is when we're thinking about water, we're thinking about things that that need some type of, we need help from, let's say, the governments, because our current state of water, there's a guy that coined the term modern water, which is not our water now, what it was back then. It's very complicated. It's a complicated source of water. It's got things in it that, we couldn't have imagined. It's, things have accumulated over time, have created different chemical components and whatnot. So that kind of stuff, on the one hand, does need to be prevented. There's what it is right now. There's a lot of stuff, happening that's just over time. It's historical. But we need that sort of support from sort of governmental support to get that, to get the commons on board. On the other hand, we also need sort of, I'm trying to take it at a different scale, people every day to kind of advocate for those kinds of things. Because, everyday people won't have the resources to treat water, for example. The infrastructures, no one has billions of dollars to do that. However, I think of this whole thing of, when we're talking about finances, it doesn't have to go that far if we take better care of the water. So that, we're talking about supporting infrastructure and whatnot, but I think about, if we had something more that was a commons-based approach to our water and to our environment, I think things would be different, that we wouldn't be in this rat race of trying to figure out the next technological innovation that will help us get out of the next problem, which creates another problem that gets us into another problem, which gets us to another problem. So I just, that's sort of some things that run through my mind quite often, is this rat race that, we're constantly in. Sorry, go ahead.
Did anyone see that video went on Facebook of California, the dumping of those black plastic balls into the lake? Anybody not see that?
I haven't seen it.
Others can add, but basically what I gathered from it was there's an issue, obviously, of drought. And so some of that drought is made worse by the fact that they lose water through evaporation of their reservoirs of water in California. And so as a way to address that issue, the engineered millions of black plastic sort of softball sized things to cover the surface of these ponds, reservoir ponds, so that to reduce the evaporation. And so I think, just a very interesting approach to thinking about water conservation by manufacturing, plastic balls to, blanket something. I don't know. Anybody else got a reaction to that in terms of water commoning or uncommoning, or this technological approach to governance?
So just to piggyback on that, if I may, with my recycling project, reclaiming the recyclable containers, bottles, and cans along the Humber watershed, I would estimate 65 to 70% of those are plastic bottles, predominantly the water bottles. It's the greatest and saddest irony. And how significant is that number? As of today, I've reclaimed 12,612 bottles and containers. So that's a huge amount of, and that's floating in the river, in the Humber Bay, or on the watershed, South Humber Forest.
Richard, I'm really curious on a bit more of your story in regards to this stepping in as a commons, as a charter bearer or as a water steward, of how, obviously you were doing this before you heard about Great Lakes Commons, I'm sure. How does the Commons Charter reinforce in many ways what you were doing? Is there a certain part of the charter that helps reinforce your ideas, or are there certain parts of the charter that put what you're doing in a different light?
Yes, I was particularly interested in the Aboriginal link, and because these are First Nations lands that I'm the steward of, I feel. It's very significant to me that September 12th, 13th is the 400th anniversary of Etienne Brûlé, having been guided by the First Nations people, was the first European to sight Lake Ontario by taking the the overland canoe and portage route. So I've linked my project to that, and when those natives paddle down the Humber River on that date, I want them to see a clean river.
Wow.
That's inspiring.
Thank you for all that.
Yeah, that is. That's beautiful.
Now it's largely maintenance mode where I've done it in South Humber Forest. However, we have a park here, South Humber Bay West. You probably know it, and the garbage is replenished every weekend by the humans.
Yeah.
So sad.
Yeah. Before we switch gears into, I'd like to sort of hear from a little bit, people, what needs they would have from, what could Great Lakes Commons do to make this charter more livable or more part of the bioregion or water systems in the world, or what you would want to offer Great Lakes Commons, and or what you would need or want from each other. I know that there's 3 of us in the Humber River region, coincidentally, all in Toronto, and there's 3 folks south of the border, not even always in the Great Lakes. So I'm really curious on this exchange of needs and offers. But before we transition into that, are there any more examples or stories people want to share of how the Great Lakes Commons Charter is doing something that is of importance here and now, and how it's either changed something that they do or think, or how it affirms something in them, or maybe even part of it that's maybe tricky or problematic? Is there a chance to sort of learn and use a different kind of model?
Well, I'll jump in. Is my mic on?
Yeah.
I'll jump in with just this, echoing the thought others have had, which is we operate in these little silos and these little small limited areas of interest, like the evaporation problem from the reservoir, which is a problem, but it's a small part of a big problem, and we tend to look at these little solutions that are dealing with these little bits of the problem. And my great hope is that the commons, where we can get a bunch of different perspectives together and talking about it, sharing and different perspectives, and we get the engineer sitting down with the farmer and the fisherman, and that some real solutions might come up, and the commons might get around this siloed, fragmented approach, and a more holistic solution might come out of it. So, I'm done.
Thank you. Anybody else?
I'm really inspired that the First Nations voices are prioritized and that their wisdom is prioritized in the commons. That is so critical for bringing humanity back into right relationship with all life, with the planet, with the waters. And it seems like the Great Lakes Commons is a fabulous opportunity to share that point of view, that wisdom with the larger society that we live in. That obviously is lacking that grounding, real grounding.
I mean, I really want to move into so what's needed to sort of, we've had this up, out into the world, as I explained, and I'm just curious to hear any advice in some ways from the group of how this can be adapted or taken to new spaces, or how new conversations can be started, because that is the real work, both in terms of conversation, but it really comes down to what someone was saying earlier around action, of where we're actually prototyping some of these decision-making models, and either action around stepping into these decision-making roles, but actually eventually having the actual power and standing that is needed. I mean, I think one can lead to the other. I just saw recently, for those in Ontario, or that when the province has recommended that when the cities do a sewer bypass, they need to let the cities know. And these bypasses are critical for public health, often happening after heavy rain. Raw sewage is actually dumped into our rivers, and which then affects the lake. And now that the cities are being mandated to let the public know. And while that was not presented as a common strategy by the NGO that really advocated hard for it, when I reposted it on Facebook in our context, I tried to bring it to highlight the fact that shared leadership needs shared knowledge, or shared knowledge leads to shared leadership. Yeah. And I think we need to sort of see the connections between these events of open access or open knowledge, and how there needs to be, we need to build a bridge to actually get to shared decision making. Because if it's only about transparency of governments telling us how bad things are, without the opportunity or building that capacity for then citizens having a role in the ongoing decision-making processes, I don't think we're really getting to the commoning potential that we need to be. We're still we may have access to information, but we don't have a voice at the table.
If I may jump in, I think Susan raised an important point relative to this, with the advent of shared. It's really shared influence. The internet and social networks have are shifting power to the individual citizens, and I think that's a vehicle to leverage, to engage in collective influence, because governments just aren't moving at the rate at which we need them to move. Yes, Ben?
Mm-hmm. Ben likes that.
Okay, thank you, Ben.
Yeah. Well, and so part of the strategic directions which Great Lakes Commons is going in, charter in hand, is trying to prototype or find existing ways in which people are reclaiming their decision-making around local water. And so often it happens in times of crisis, like in Detroit, the People's Water Board has organized as a way to ensure that people's human rights are not denied with access to water. And obviously, it's still looking at water from the tap mostly versus water underground or in the streams. But I would, if part of the network we're trying to build here is sharing stories of where communities have taken greater roles in the stewardship and governance of their waterways, be it without the open access knowledge or not. There's two women who did a crowdfunding campaign near Sarnia, Amjawang First Nation, that's ongoing to learn what's in their water. So they crowdfunded, a Commons way of some ways raising money to actually do some citizen science and to find out what's in their water so that they're not dependent upon established sources of information to tell them what's in their water. This is the water that's in their bodies, and yet we're usually disconnected from the results or the processes or the sort of the mystification system of water quality. So. Marina's got a thing. You want to unmute yourself, Marina?
So the other day I was, our Toronto Conservation Authority has different initiatives that are going on. But one of the initiatives that I thought was interesting and just sort of had me thinking, it's quite simple, but I think it could, with some thought, I think it could go somewhere. So they have this thing called the Yellowfish Road. And the Yellowfish Road essentially it tries to bring awareness to people about storm drains versus sewage, right? So a lot of people, when they're washing their cars or dumping stuff, they're dumping it into the storm drains, which goes directly into the lakes. And this, there's no filtration going on. And so what they do is they campaign in different communities. So they get the entire community informed, and then they paint these yellow fishies just above the sewer, the storm drain, just to make them aware that, when you are dumping this, these soaps and whatnot, it's actually going into the ecosystem and it's not being filtered, because a lot of people just don't know. So I thought that was really interesting. And when I was speaking to the person that leads this, she was saying that a lot of people are just not aware of, the difference between a storm drain and a sewer. They simply don't know. And when she talks to communities, like some people really feel bad because they're like, oh, I've been washing my car for like 10 years and I've been purposely putting it into the storm drain, thinking that it's going to be filtered and whatnot. So I think just that awareness of where waters go, like where do things go? I think it might be a good starting place, because again, it's that groundwater surface water relation that and land relation that I don't think is always. People are not always connecting, especially in urban areas. I think probably in rural areas it might be a bit different, or if you live on water. But yeah, in urban areas, because everything is, in a pipe or in a building and it's enclosed and you never see it, I think there's a lot to learn. I think in general, I think communities have a lot to learn. I learned quite a lot myself when I was in that workshop, but I was also thinking of, wow, and I generally read about these things, and there were some things that I just didn't know, and I thought, well, if we're thinking about, people are just really busy, and, when they want to wash their car, they wash their car, and I understand that there's that, whole public-private thing, but it's also dividing that. It's what your actions have a greater sort of have a greater reaction. Yeah, but I think it's really just based on the awareness of things. Sometimes it's people just are not aware of these connections, and sometimes bringing those things like doing a Yellowfish project or like the citizen science project that Paul was mentioning. I think those are good ways to really get people thinking, at least just initially.
With my little project, I've noticed people use the park and then leave all their bottles and cans behind. There's never any feedback loop there, and I think this relates to your story, Marina. Without a feedback loop showing the consequences, the outcomes of their behaviors continue, right?
Yeah, I find one of those, there's so many disconnects, right? You both just raised. And I think another one of those is the difference between public and commons. And I've observed the same thing where you go to a public park or a beach and you see the way people treat it. And while I have no research to back this up, my feeling is that people feel like it's not their responsibility. It's the city workers, right? It's the city's garbage cans. They work for us, and I'm not getting paid to clean this beach, and there's people whose job it is. And so there is this divide, and while there's been some examples of in Toronto with parks and people taking more ownership of what happens in their parks and the city really resisting it oftentimes, we're still in this split of either public or private, and there is no real common space where people feel some sort of ownership in terms of responsibility towards the space. And I'm really curious on what a commons charter symbol or using the yellowfish as an example, what could be learned from that and adapted so that when we are using water either from our homes or out in the world, there is that messaging, that connecting that needs to happen, that both will experience. How do we close that feedback? How do we create that feedback loop? Yeah,
I think it's,
there should be oh, sorry, Susan. Okay, Susan, you can go ahead.
no, go ahead.
Oh, everyone's being so polite.
Well, I guess.
Yeah, whose spot was the one that was? Yeah, go for it. I'll just shut up.
Yeah, just interesting because they did the same storm drain stenciling out in San Diego. I noticed it there a few years ago, and it made me stop and think, where is a way? But yeah, that sense of ownership, and I don't know how you foster that, but possibly it's simply a neighbor talking to a neighbor. And what comes to my mind is a tree planting program in the city of Oswego, where once the people get a tree in front of their house, a little street tree between the sidewalk and the curb, they often take ownership of it. Even though it's a city tree, they water it and they nourish it. And I think it's a little bit of a one person seeing another person's action, and just one at a time. Okay.
Thanks, Susan. So I see Marina had her hand, and then I see Ellen raised her hand as well.
Go, Alan. You can go ahead because I've spoken already, and I'll wait. I'll wait my turn. It's okay. Go ahead.
Thank you. So I want to bring up an initiative that is happening in Italy. I'm not sure if it's around water. It's all around all things public. There's a group called LabGov. Their website is labgov.it. And they are creating models for citizen participation in any form of government or any level of government. They're creating specific collaborations around specific commons. So there's people who feel, there's people who get involved with any number of public goods. They say, we're going to common it. So it's a commons public collaboration. They're doing some amazing things, especially in Bologna, where they're actually going to have a conference in early November about commoning cities.
Can you share that link in our chat box, Ellen, so that we can all
Sure.
get make sure we get the right information there? And
sure.
Yeah, I mean, back to what Susan was saying earlier around that there is a larger movement, and you know, I've met Ben and Ellen through these larger movements around open space and collaboration and commons, and you know, we can both inform and be informed by these examples of city as commons and you know, international projects. So Susan, so Ellen has. We in the all button, Ellen, you can share that link. You're muted, but and
Yeah,
while
I'm looking for the links.
oh, no worries. And while Ellen's looking for the link, actually, I will share my screen one more time. Behind the scenes, Ben is a master conversation holder himself, and I guess the black balls story of the reservoir reminded Ben that he actually is hosting a virtual town hall August 25th, California virtual town hall. It's a dry world, and so there will be a pretty big conversation on the 25th, and I will share that link in the chat box as well. Ben, did you want to speak any more directly to that?
Well, I'm co-hosting. There's an organization called Circle of Blue that does journalism on water, food, and energy issues worldwide, and they're the lead conveners on this. I'm coming in to help them design the process, and I'm coordinating a lot of the technical elements and some of the aspects of running the call, which will include the ability to be in small breakout groups. So there's conversation, there's breakouts with each of the expert panelists that are going to be present as well. So if somebody in particular is someone you want to hear, you can go to the room where they are. So it's an example of what's possible with the technology that both Susan and Richard have been talking about for live engagement, not to mention all the things that we can do online, what we normally think of as online and virtual with tools like Facebook and social media. And the hope is that this is just the beginning of a more in-depth conversation that Circle Blue helps to create. They're partnering with American Public Media, so because of California's prominence, a lot more attention's being paid to water than was the case before April when Jerry Brown made his announcement and the snowpack measurements came in. We were actually doing another event with them, and Jerry Brown's press conference happened at the exact moment that we were on the phone with 150 people talking about what California should do about the drought. So anyway, would love, if you want to come check that out. They're coming live from World Water Week in Stockholm, Sweden, and tying that in with people in San Francisco and people around the world. So it should be interesting. Yeah, thanks for the chance to plug that. I think I'm here because I want to collaborate with Great Lakes Commons, directly too, and perhaps at one point Paul and I were talking about that being one component of a larger water-related conversation. But I'm feeling more called right now to see the work we might do together being specifically focused on what the commons and the network and the community that it's helping to bring forth, on serving that. So I'll say more about that when we get into offers and requests.
Well, I think that's a great segue. We're about 5 after 4 here, and these are actually all, now I hear them sort of blending. I mean, people are offering things that they're involved in, or projects, or even offering insights, obviously into different programs. But there is more time here to speak specifically about what people think they need, not necessarily from this group, but need from Great Lakes Commons. Richard, if you need more volunteers, or if someone's looking for some advice on something, or somebody feels they can offer a certain skill or network, or who knows, maybe someone's got access to a water lab for some citizen science, who knows. And so Great Lakes Commons is offering to host spaces on a regular basis, where either through this format or through the Great Lakes Commons map, open invitation for people writing blog posts. We are trying to create this terrain, this space of a Great Lakes Commons where people feel welcomed and able to express their commoning in a shared sort of way, while at the same time we want to offer not necessarily a prescription, but we do have a direction that we do want to develop this rating of commons and indigenous knowledge, and seeing how commons is itself as an indigenous relationship with land and waters. And so if there are other things that you feel Great Lakes Commons generally, or even in Toronto or in the States or where you live, please let us know today or through email. That's what we really here to sort of facilitate that commenting. And I think Richard may have an ad here. Yeah.
Paul, just Susan's observation about give a person a tree, and Ellen's reference to the Bologna engaging the citizenry in taking charge of their own environment, I take it. It made me realize that the sections of the Humber Bay West that I've removed the junk from, I own it. I feel like I own that. I am a totally engaged citizen in that. And I think there's a power in designated ownership. And again, that skips back to Susan's idea of the social network of giving people perceived ownership over a section of the Great Lakes shoreline, for example. John Lambertsky is doing it with Cherry Beach. I've helped him clean up down there too. So we just feel great pride and ownership, and it's citizen power. We move the earth quietly, one can at a time.
This
By the way, the other side to this is the liquor bottles. I don't know if you know, Ben, Ellen, the liquor bottles are returnable for money in Canada. And that all goes to charity. We've raised quite a bit of money doing that too.
How does that
double
charity?
here? I'm also in a condo building, and we collect liquor bottles and return them for money, and they're dedicated. It's all the money is given to a charity.
Okay.
A place for refugees, Romero House, if you know it.
Oh yeah, immigrants, settlements, and equity. Maybe Great Lakes Commons needs a revenue stream like that. We could think of all the bottles in Great Lakes. We could be millionaires.
Well, the revenue could be directed. It could be fed back into Great Lakes Common.
Yeah.
Not necessarily in my case, but if you want to make a major project out of it, that could be a self-funding goodwill opportunity. Win-win-win.
Sweet. I had an interesting observation around this whole idea of ownership. And I think, when we say the word ownership in this commons context, we're obviously aware around how that's both opportunities to step into a role while also not necessarily locking it down in a private possession kind of way. There's a group doing the Adopt a Beach sort of strategy, which is again trying to facilitate this sense of connection. But I was looking at thinking about the words adopt a beach, and again these themes that we've talked about in terms of paradigm shift. And we did a workshop in Toronto a little while ago called "Becoming a Great Ancestor," and trying to look at water as a commons versus as a commodity or as an object. And then I was thinking about, and again, I've learned most of this through our networks and friendships with Aboriginal members of the Great Lakes Commons. And I thought, wouldn't it be interesting, rather than having an Adopt a Beach program, having a Be Adopted by a Beach program, where it's not necessarily you taking on the beach, it's the beach taking on you, and sort of you belonging to the waters versus the waters belonging to you. This was one of I'm a cultural studies person, so I love these kind of trippy things, but not to take away from the heart of the essence of what they're trying to do, but I'm always sort of interrogating the language and the relationships in these programs and how they can get us out of the mess versus keeping us on that track of more plastic balls in the reservoir. So I'll stop there. Marina wants to say something. You gotta do it yourself. DIY.
Okay, I click on the wrong thing all the time. I think that really it creates an interesting shift in terms of even power and how power sort of works with our relationship with water. So when you're adopting a beach, you have the funds and you are doing what you need to do to, from a very anthropocentric perspective,
Oh.
taking care. And that a lot of that times, like when they are doing the adopt a beach stuff or adopt a road or adopt a whatever, like I always think it always ends up boiling down to funds, right? So I'm putting in the funds and then it'll be taken care of. So it's again, I think there are people that are very active, don't get me wrong, but there are also people that will just give money and expect someone else to take care of it. So I think having the reversal that you're talking about, Paul, shifts it as, although it's saying that, nature will take care of you in a way, or I think what's important about that shift in thinking is it kind of connotes a more of a reciprocal relation, in that if your beach in this case is clean, then you can swim in it. So this reciprocal relation that I think often gets lost in most of the relations we have with water and nature in general. So I think that shift in how we view it is also a shift in power, going from an anthropocentric perspective to more of a holistic perspective, which definitely could, like, having that paradigm shift, I think would be a very important piece, because I think although we've come a long way, I would say, since, the 1970s, and I'm sorry if I'm, but, where it was the environment's there to exploit and to spoil, and it's okay, that's fine. That was sort of the perspective, because it wasn't that they weren't thinking about things, and this is where a lot of bad things had happened. I think there's more awareness being put to the forefront, but I think it's still at the sort of anthropocentric view, as opposed to something a little bit more reciprocal and something beyond humans, more than human, if you may.
To your point, Marina, I liked it when Paul used the expression steward, but I really perceive myself as a caretaker. And that bears that relationship that I think you're describing. I'm accountable to this plot of land, this shoreline.
Mm-hmm. And why is that, though? I guess because it takes care of you.
Well, I love it. It gives me great pleasure. I go down to the lake, to the point every day to meditate, and I write haikus down there, by the way.
Yeah.
And this one came out this morning, if I may read it.
Oh, my, yes, it's
Post downpour, angry lake howls, plows hurl sewage stain back onto shorelines. That's what we saw down the lake this morning. The raw sewage was, with our rainstorm yesterday in Toronto, it had gone into the lake. So I'm capturing that reality.
Maybe
no data.
We need the citizen science with some citizen haiku, perhaps, to talk about our relationship with water. That's a fabulous method. Thank you.
I think it has to work on all levels. These little success stories, the sad stories, the First Nation stories, and that's how you're going to reach people. And somebody said the entity is one. I think you said that, Paul. Reaching one person, and perhaps it was Ben.
Any other sort of offers or insights that, again, even these insights, I think, are offerings to this community. And while if you want me to cut out your voice, this will be offered on YouTube so that this offering can be shared to an ongoing, growing audience. And so our offers and needs don't necessarily need to be material things or financial things. Make this conversation in and of itself. So I just wanted to reopen that opportunity up. So Susan, yes.
Just real quick, it's fascinating to hear the last speaker was watching the lake, because I, on the other side, at the same time he was watching it, I was also watching the lake, seeing something very different. And that sense of somebody else is over there watching it and owning a little bit of it, just as I was this morning, I think that's the kind of thing we need to kind of pull us together as commoners. And that is quite fascinating to know that while I'm watching the little bits of wind rushing across the surface of the lee shore, which is flat, he sees the other side with the south wind pounding the waves of shore, and this he sees the big cities, and I see this clear water in front of a country stretch of shore exactly at the same time. That's how we're going to get this community in this common sense, I think, is knowing there's somebody else out there who's concerned and has a sense of ownership. That's absolutely fascinating.
I thank you, Susan. I love the way that it's reduced to a very personal human story, and that's where we hit people on their heart, in the heart, right, on the evocative side. And I think that's what's necessary to bring about behavioral change, largely.
I just posted a link to some writings from a close friend of mine here in Austin. His name is Charles Herman. He's a philosopher and scholar of many, many different things, but one of his specialties is stewardship. So you might find some of his, I posted a link to the SSRN site where he has a lot of different papers. But he is now currently working, finally, on applying stewardship to the commons. And so I'm working with him on that to unpack that, and hopefully we'll have something to share soon.
Thank you for that. And the earlier link that Ellen talked about, the LabGov, is just above in the scroll of the chat box as well.
And that was both the link to the city is common, commenting the city, and to their main site.
Mm-hmm. And in the spirit of sharing links, I gotta, Ellen, that article you gave me around the commons was one of my favorites. So I'll put that in there, by a guy named Max Haven, and he's in Nova Scotia right now, and reimagining our collective powers against austerity. And I think it was maybe Marina earlier who talked about, the financial system and all the rest. And I do think I think Detroit is a good, I was at a water conference this past May in Chicago, and a lot of talk about Toledo and water quality, because the Toledo residents had their taps shut off because of E. coli and pollution. And I remember just asking folks in a public forum, I said, why are we talking only about Toledo and not talking about Detroit? And I think the financial aspects of this water crisis need to be named, and I think they're intertwined with capitalism, with global financial structures. And I think, a strategy that looks at water quality doesn't look at access and equity and privatization issues is missing the boat, because the waters could be clean from where you live, but if there's a gate around it or an admission that you can't afford, they may as well be as polluted as the worst place on earth. And so I really feel empowered that the Commons Charter and the Commons work is able to hold those various aspects of water quality and water access. And I think enclosure is a better term than pollution, because it can involve both. But again, this is the work of trying to help a lot of water NGOs see how their language around pollution is missing part of it, and either through the Adopt a Beach or through just looking at water quality, we're missing out on, in some ways, water equality. It's weird, I'm just coining that right now. So anyways, I'll offer that link up there. It's, I think, a really great meditation on these things. And Ben's got one there too.
Yeah, I didn't mean to hit send until after I talked about this, so.
Okay.
But maybe I should go.
Improvise.
Yeah, so I'm very, this whole question of how we move into action together and how we do that in this networked way rather than a hierarchical way is at the heart of the kinds of conversational spaces and engagements that I've been hosting. And I'm experimenting with something new now that's very much connected to the idea of the commons as well, and the idea of a gift or sharing economy. The basic possibility is that we can, if a group of people, and ideally they're coming from all kinds of different directions, well, in this particular iteration they are, it could also be something directly tied to an initiative or a network or community like the Great Lakes Commons is forming. If a group of us comes together, even for a modest period of time, with a commitment to help each other and to share offers and requests as we're doing here, but give it a little more time and space so we can think about it, and invite the people who love to do that connecting work, to get in there and thrive and be honored for that. So you post a request, somebody else is going to look at that request, and they're going to talk to the people they know who might be helpful and find out who those people know, and the matchmaking and stuff will happen. So this sort of peer-to-peer building up of the ways that we can help ourselves is part of this idea of a co-opathon. And the prototype I'm doing right now is Co-opathon 2015, I'm calling it. And so this one is for anybody doing work that's related to a fundamental, systemic shift in how we, to really honoring the sacred in this world and reclaiming that in all its dimensions is one way to phrase it. There's so many words for this. I just can't wait till we just say there's the movement and we're all part of it, and it's got all these different facets, so that's the language I'm using. So there's both this exchange sort of peer-to-peer. There's also a common pool that we will gather, a crowd resourcing process. So it'll be money, but other things too, that we will then collectively give away in a kind of a potlatch at the end. And so this is a small scale experiment in this, but I want to invite anyone who's interested to have a conversation with me about it, and maybe you'd want to participate, partly just to experience it, certainly as a way to ask for help in anything you want to do or offer help, but also to think about what we might learn from this and how it might apply in the Great Lakes Commons. Maybe a little cohort of commoners from your network comes in and plays in the space, and then we could perhaps do a second version of it based on what's learned. So if you're interested in that, my email is there. Paul's got it too, so you could always reach me through him. But I really want to do kind of a one-on-one invitation conversation with people who want to do this and invite you all to play. It's basically running now through the middle of December, and you can kind of engage as much or as little as you like. It's all virtual. Other forms could have in-person elements too, I think, but this one's all virtual. And so that's a request that if you're interested, ping me and let's have an invitation conversation. And it's fine. There's no sales pressure. If you say no, that's fine. An offer is that if there's some particular thing you want me to promote through my networks, I'm happy to do that. A particular request you have now that could use, that's suited to just sort of shouting out to the world, hey, this is going on, this thing needs support, or share this story. In particular, I have some good networks on the ground in Chicago and in Toronto, but I'm also sort of networked through the whole global community of change agents. So I'm happy to offer some specific support there. Thanks.
Wow. I mean, I think, Ben, really what you have is so valuable, because I think there really is can be this gap between the ideas of what we need and the kinds of capacities, tools, skills, dedication, practicing that we need as commoners. And so the verb of commons is actually more important than the concept in many ways. And I think I know that I wasn't trained in those areas. I was trained as a thinker and to do analysis. I wasn't trained to do collaboration. And I think, just on the radio today in Toronto, there was talking about back to school and the school system and problems with the school system. But I think if there was something I would want to change in the school system, it would be, rather than teaching people how to just analyze or remember things, it's teaching people how to collaborate, because that is these hard skills that the complex issues that we face locally and globally are going to make or break things. So Ben, you're at least you're way out there, but I always learning.
Thank you. I'm aware of the time, but there's something that strikes me as important that I'd love to respond with based on what you said. So part of the inspiration for the co-opathon idea, I mean, the verb there is cooperate as opposed to collaborate, is that collaboration is hard, right? If we're really going to do work together and it's a new project we're taking on, not all of us have room for a new project. Plus, that's just complicated. And my sense is that if we start by supporting the work that's in motion, the things that are already on our lists to do or that we're doing, that the opportunities to do that higher order of collaborating will be best served by starting out in that way anyhow. But if we start out with the higher order stuff, it can be very frustrating. It takes so much time and energy, and there's so much good work that's already happening. And I think we need to stop telling ourselves the story that all that work that's happening isn't good enough. We don't know. We say it's too fragmented, it's not coordinated, it's not this, it's not that. And what's needed is something that we don't see happening now. But because there's so much happening, we don't see it all as it currently is. And maybe what's happening is enough. So I think there's something really liberating and powerful in just supporting that and in doing it in a celebratory way so that we're accomplishing things. But by the end of this co-opathon, we'll have a list of things we did that we can celebrate. Whereas if we go for some big collaborative thing, yes, maybe that's valuable, maybe that's needed, but we can't, it's just, the effort that goes in. I just want people to feel like the time we spend together is clearly productive in ways we can name, and let the bigger, ambitious things flow out of that positive energy. Thanks. I'll get off my
That makes sense.
Well, also mindful of the time, I think hopefully this cafe was a small example of Ben's vision and a way of practicing that commenting. We put out the call, and we want you to support the charter. We want to celebrate your successes and be informed by those. But we also wanted to help people meet each other. Now I've met Richard just down the road from me. Let's clean this together, and I'll pick up some bottles. I got some bottles here on the floor, actually. I will be adding it to our blog post with updates for this. And if anybody, I also compile these links into one shareable document, which I'll send around to everybody. And I don't need to have the last word, but if it is, I just want to thank everyone for their time, and stay in touch with me and with others in the GLC and with each other. And let's practice these tools and check out those links and continue it. Anybody else want to say goodbye or last words?
Would you like me to post some haikus to the site?
The Commons app, I know, would love some haikus there, Richard, if that's what you're thinking. The Commons app, yeah.
Very
Definitely.
good.
I just wanted to say it was a pleasure meeting everybody. Thank you for all the inspiring things that you do. Sometimes I feel a little jaded, and after this conversation, I feel really good. So thank you for that. I appreciate what you guys do and how you think about things. And I've learned a lot. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks,
I'll be
Paul.
thinking about you tomorrow, Susan, from across the lake.
Yeah.
By the way, does everybody see that there's a button to save the chat? So there's all these links. The links won't be clickable, but you'll have it all in text form.
Oh, wonderful.
Thank you.
Paul can
Sure,
check
it's good
that
to
out.
connect with everybody today and have this wonderful conversation. So I look forward to connecting again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Okay.